How you doing? I'm Jalen Williams. This is my critical thinking final project. Uh, for the final project, we were asked to create a mini crash course and give a summary on the information that we learned in this class throughout the school year, throughout the semester. So with this, I'll just give a brief introduction into what critical thinking actually is and why it's useful. Critical thinking is looking at arguments and analyzing them critically to find out the truth and to analyze arguments to figure out whether they're true or not. It's a way of critical thinking is a way of analyzing arguments or commonly thought arguments in order to reach for a more known, more honest truth. Uh, to start off with critical thinking, you must first understand claims and what arguments are. So, an argument is anything that has some type of premise, right, that leads to some type of conclusion. So, for example, I can say that we should not eat dairy because it is bad for our bodies, right? The premise is that we should not eat dairy, right? Given that we should not intake into dairy products. But our final conclusion is um, that we should not eat dairy products because they are indeed bad for our body, right? So that is a whole argument, and with that argument, it can be true or not. In the way that we critically think is the way that we assess these arguments. These arguments in claims, right? So um, you want to when having claims or arguments, you want to use clear words. You don't want to use words like and if. You want to make clear arguments so that these claims and arguments have exact points, that have exact premises that leads to exact conclusion. Um, and otherwise, it would just be an open-ended argument which doesn't have any type of truth to it. Examples of this can be examples like I said of a good argument is uh, like we should not eat dairy because it is bad for our health, right? That is a good argument, right? But an example of an argument that uses like unclear words is that we should not eat dairy because it isn't for us, right? It being not being for us isn't really clear in a sense because we don't know what effects that it had. Like, why shouldn't we really eat it? Like, why isn't it for us? It's like an unclear argument with unclear words. Another example of a good argument is PlayStation is better than Xbox because because it has a bigger memory, right? Use of unclear words is PlayStation is better than Xbox because it's my favorite game system, right? It's use of unclear words that doesn't have a premise that leads to a direct conclusion, right? Another, the last example of this is the car wouldn't start. I mean, your battery in your car is dead because you left it on all night, right? That's a premise, right? The car being dead, right? Because that leads to a conclusion because you left it on all night, right? So that argument is clear and precise. And the kind of argument to that where it wouldn't be as clear is um, your car battery is dead because your car battery is dead because it's old, right? So it doesn't really describe what really went wrong with the car battery or what happened to it specifically to cause it the damage. It's just kind of like use unclear words to kind of complete that argument. So it is important, definitely, when making arguments, to use clear words and clear facts, clear premises that lead to clear and precise conclusions, right? To have a whole concise and cohesive argument that leads to the truth. So you also will argument explain why it's important to think critically with arguments, because with arguments being uh, so specific and were meant to be so specific and have direct truth and come to a direct conclusion, arguments usually lie completely in the truth or completely out of the truth. So, right, when you think critically, it is important to think critically about arguments, because it's easy to make arguments. We make a lot of arguments throughout the day, a lot of statements as humans. We just make a lot of statements throughout the day, some which are true and some which are not true. So it's important to think critically about these arguments, because we make so many, and it's easy for us to just accept arguments as truth, especially when it comes from people that we perceive to have like higher wisdom than us, or seem to be more educated than us. We just seem to always accept these arguments to be true. But it's very important for us as humans to think critically about every argument that we receive, right? And completely analyze the premise and see if that directly leads to the conclusion. And with that we can lead to a more honest truth in our arguments, and have more truthful and more honest understandings of things, because we're no longer feeding ourselves these false arguments, because we are thinking critically about every argument, which kind of helps narrow down the truth from what is said to be false. And it also works vice versa. It's some arguments that are known to be false, and thinking critically about them can help you discover that they actually do have some truth in them. So critical thinking can work both ways in that regard. So in evaluating arguments and looking for critical thinking, oh, my bad. Going back about arguments, we want to talk about the types of structure of the arguments, structure of logical arguments, right? So you have deductive and non-deductive arguments, and you have inductive and abductive arguments, right? And these arguments kind of all act in the same way, but just in different forms. So deductive, you deduct something from something else. So like the argument I gave before with the car battery being dead, like you're deducting that the car battery is dead because you left the car running all night. So that's kind of like a deductive argument where you kind of deduce some type of conclusion. Then you have a non-deductive arguments, which are kind of just arguments that you kind of don't deduce a conclusion, but the conclusion kind of like sits alone as itself. And they also are arguments that kind of work on like probability. So an example of this would be kind of like the lactose intolerant example I gave earlier. Like we should not eat dairy because 80% of people are lactose intolerant. It doesn't necessarily mean that it deduces that you are lactose intolerant, being that the number is not 100%, but it is possible that you would be lactose intolerant, so you should not participate in the eating of dairy. So those are the examples of those two arguments. With critical thinking, like I said before, it's about evaluating these arguments and seeing whether these arguments have some type of logical validity to them, like are they actual valid arguments, and that is the process of critical thinking in itself, is analyzing these arguments and reviewing these arguments and seeing whether these arguments have valid premises that lead to valid conclusions, leading to an overall valid argument. Uh, making a sound argument is having the idea that where a clear premise again leads to a clear conclusion, and both these premise and conclusion has to be true. So, for example, like I said, uh, going back to the lactose intolerance example, you should not drink milk or not eat dairy because 80% of people are lactose intolerant. 80% of people would have to be lactose intolerant for that argument to actually be true. Because that is the conclusion of the argument, is that 80% that you shouldn't do it because 80% of people are lactose intolerant. So you have to make sure both that premise and that conclusion both have 100% truth in them for that whole argument to be true and valid. So that is kind of like the simplest way that we critically think about these arguments. And this is why concepts like using clear language are important, and things of that nature, because it's easy for arguments to get misstrayed and misconstrued by like just one word. For example, you can have an argument that said all men want freedom, therefore we all fight for freedom, right? When it might be like one outlier that doesn't like want freedom. It might be one male outlier that don't want freedom. So you really can't use the word all when you're going back and looking at the argument, critically thinking and analyzing that argument. You can't use the word all because all men might not want freedom, right? It might be some outliers, like I said, that don't want freedom. So a better argument may be many men want freedom, or most men want freedom, right? So that just goes along with word choice, and just seeing if an argument is sound. So making sure, like I said again, the premise and both the premise and conclusion both have factual components to them and have truthful components. Because if not, then you would come up the concept of fallacies, right? And you have logical fallacies and informal fallacies, but basically fallacies are arguments that either aren't completely supported or are missing some type of truth or some type of premise to make them 100% true. Like one example is don't go out to the sun because you're going to get skin cancer, right? That is a fallacy, because going out to the sun doesn't have, while it does, or while it can cause skin cancer, it doesn't have a direct cause to skin cancer in every person. So just saying don't go out in the sun because you're gonna get skin cancer is a fallacy, because it's very possible for a person to go out to the sun and not catch skin cancer. So we try to avoid fallacies when critically thinking. Critical thinking helps us avoid these fallacies, because we're analyzing these arguments to make sure that they don't stray from the original. From the truth, both in the premise and the conclusion. So finally, I found we want to go over three examples of where critical thinking is needed in today's society. So the first major example is the vaccine. Many people are saying that they don't want to get the vaccine because of like they just don't know what it can do to their bodies, or they don't know what long-term effects the vaccine can have, and things of that nature. But I think many of these people are kind of speaking just with the mindset of like conspiracy, kind of like just because other people told them that like, yeah, the vaccine might mess something up or it might do something. They kind of lean more towards that side, and I've seen that a lot with the arguments that people have been making, trying not to take the vaccine to come back to campus, or to not just take the vaccine in general. Many people are making arguments that it will alter them or alter their kids or their DNA. So I just think they need to think critically about getting the vaccine. Just thinking critically about what actually is in the vaccine, doing the research, and seeing the truth behind what that vaccine is actually doing, and how that vaccine can actually help or harm a person, before just kind of going off that basic idea of like conspiracy, of like the government being after you or trying to inject something in your body, and just actually like thinking critically and sitting down doing the research about it. Secondly, I think people need to think more critically about policing. A lot of people come out and said that we need to, the whole defund the police movement. People saying we need to take money out of the police and try to put it more so into areas which kind of practice rehabilitation. But again, I think people should think more critically about defunding policing, because just looking and thinking critically at those arguments, there are many cases where people are just in situations that are kind of beyond them, and they need public safety in a way, or it's just criminals that's out there that regular people can't take down. You need some type of public safety, and you need some type of way to enforce the law, right? So just thinking critically about that, and not just going off the emotions of deaths or movements or things of that nature, just kind of jumping the gun and saying defunding the police, and just really thinking critically about what the police actually do and what the police actually help us do in our community, and how they actually are an integral part of any neighborhood or community in America. I think that would help people understand that maybe defunding the police might not be the best idea. And lastly, I think people should think more critically just about religion. Many people are passed down their religious beliefs, and thinking critically about religion is hard because it's not a lot. You can't really get a factual truth to religion per se, where it will be agreed upon all people, like one factual truth. In religion, like, it just doesn't exist. But there's a concept of religion where you can get a personal truth, and I think that is more important than anything when thinking about religion. It's easy for us when growing up in traditions of our family's religions, just to practice it because we have been told to practice it, or we've been shown to practice it ever since we were little. But thinking critically about it will help us try to find God in our personal lives, so we can have a personal truth and a personal relationship with God, and it will help us build a more genuine relationship with that relationship as a whole. So I think that was the last example of people that should be able to, a subject where people should be thinking more critically about. So with that being said, that is my project for the semester. I would like to thank you, Dr. Nugas, for your time in this class. I learned a lot about thinking critically, and I also learned just about how to analyze and attack different arguments and different information that I get thrown at me. So I would like to thank you for the semester, and have a great summer.